Hi, everyone, and welcome to the interview with Keith Goode. Keith is the Vice President of Client Services at ZeroedIn and has been in the HR industry for quite a long time. What does that mean? We're about to find out. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive and a skim across the top of HR in a world of AI and data. Keith has been the Vice President of Client Services more than 10 years, where he leads the implementation and support efforts of the ZeroedIn platform used to transform HR, talent, and business data into actionable intelligence. Previously, Keith held various management consulting and corporate roles at General Dynamics, AON Hewitt and Saba. With over 20 years delivering human capital management and business intelligence solutions, Keith finds it exciting to deploy tools and techniques such as data mining, collective listening, machine learning, and predictive modeling in a platform that solves real-world HR and business issues. I'm stumbling on my words a bit this morning. It must be because it's 7 a.m. here, and I don't normally get up until 7:05. So, anyway, welcome to the show, Keith. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Jeff, it's great. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
So we both, as we dialed in and we fired up the screens and we looked at each other from around the world, from the other side of the world at each other, Keith said, "Jeff, you're wearing same watch as me, which is a Garmin, which is to track our lives and captures data." So, and it's true. I use mine for measuring how far and fast I ride, how high I climb on my bike as I pedal around my area, and also do some hills and tours. So, Keith, what led you to get into HR? I know you mentioned to me that you sort of stumbled into it. What does stumbling into HR look like? Tell me about that.
Well, I have to admit, my passion's really been lies around generating value from data. We share the same watch. It's data. I'm a data geek. I love working with data and specifically looking for the value that data can bring. And just like Garmin can bring value to our workouts, to our lives, I've stumbled into how data and analytics can add value in the HR space. It's typically called workforce analytics, but ultimately it's providing additional information and elements so that people can make better decisions about their workforce.
So we've got a very fast changing world with AI coming into the picture now, which is being used in a very general way with ChatGPT, like it's what we call a horizontal AI. It applies to, you can apply it to a whole range of industries. Within that sits, and underneath that sits the vertical, I suppose, silos of different apps for different industries. So, but let's go back to data and HR. So you've been a data geek. What do you love about data? Is it just the insights? Is it you? We also were talking before that data can be just, well, that's the thing about information too. Everything, you can actually collect the data, but it's making sense of the data that becomes where it really brings the value, isn't it? So you collect the data, it's all this information, but what does it mean to us as humans to make wise decisions? Because there's a lot of data and there's a lot of information, but there's very little wisdom. And hopefully that's what humans should be applying to the world. But we're seeing maybe a little lack of wisdom at the moment in the world. But so how do you massage is maybe not a good word for data, but how do you take that data and make sense of it? I'd be intrigued by how that happens in the HR industry.
Well, it's interesting. If we look in the HR industry and analytics, specifically in HR, and today it kind of reminds me of high school sex. Everyone's talking about it. No one really knows how to do it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so they claim to be doing it as well. So I mean, that's kind of where we are today. I think if you look at HR organizations, been around for a long time, has tremendous amounts of data. Look at just the payroll data that's happened in organizations over the organization's lifespan, the people that have come and gone, the tenure of many people, and all the different changes that they acquire over their tenure at an organization. So all of those are data elements that many in HR just overlook. we see in HR a lot of time a propensity to change one system to another, one learning management system to another learning management system. Well, what happens to all of that old data? What happens to, years and years of historical data that, believe it or not, I consider a gold mine. Yes, it may take quite a bit of effort of mining that, but there's real information that can be told about an organization's workforce by looking at that historical data and or correlating data across those different silos in HR. HR, is made up of learning, as I mentioned, learning and development, payroll, comp, benefits, performance, of course, your HRIS system, talent acquisition. So typically they're housed in different systems, but being able to bring that together so that an organization, HR, has one place to go where they can see their workforce and the historical workforce to be able to draw conclusions from that, they can make better decisions in the future. And that's really what it gets down to.
Okay. So you mentioned learning management systems. So how does that apply to HR? Because I see it's tossed around. So what is this about? Internal training? In other words, do people score well on that? Are they interested? Are you trying to pick up, I suppose, signals from data that reveal a bit more about the emotional side and intelligence of people? Because data can be pretty black and white in a sense. It's very hard. It's getting harder. AI is maybe a bit in the same box, but how do you guys use analytics for learning management systems? And what is learning management systems? What does that look like in plain English?
Oh, absolutely. So I think, from an organization's perspective, they've got a goal, a vision, to get to a certain point. So how do they organize their workforce, their human resources to accommodate that? They can go out and buy that and hire those resources, and they can train and develop those resources internally. And that's where learning management gets into. So when there's, when you can look across all those silos and say, yes, the best approach is let's take these resources that are at this level, and maybe with additional training and development resources, we can get them to this level where we need to be. That's where L&D, learning and development, can really, really shine and play a huge role in that. So from an analytics perspective, it might be everything from, identifying those resources in which specific training and the types of training that can help elevate them at the right time, at the right place, at the most efficient way to get them to the level the organization needs to be. Analytics can play a huge part of that. And of course, we can then take that further and looking at the historical aspect of the people, say, have been trained a certain way, and we can feed that into an AI model to help predict how things are going to go in the future. And that can further refine an organization's effort and time and resources that go into developing those people.
Right. Isn't it, for me, looking at being human and also my past and also my education, in that a lot of organizations go, we're going to cross-skill you in the organization. We're going to make you a good accountant. We're going to make you a good strategist. We're going to make you a good HR person. You are going to have all these skills. I have a problem with that in the sense that we've all got different inclinations and aptitudes, and to try and turn me into an accountant would be really, really ugly, right? So my brother and I, he's an accountant. I'm a bigger picture strategic sort of guy. I know I annoy the shit out of him a lot of times because he wants to get to the point. I'm going, let's look at the big picture. I want to look at detail, and my eyes are glazing over and I'm running screaming for the hills. So learning management systems is a little bit of an aside, but it's very much to do with HR. Is there a movement to actually still do all this cross-skilling and make everyone like, Jesus, good at everything? Or is it really about, identifying what people's strengths are and just doubling down and make them be, an Einstein rather than, just a generalist?
Well, I think more of the latter. There's a goal, there's a need, there's a desire. So how can analytics support and identify the most effective and efficient and cost-effective resources and methods to get those people to that level. So in your case, analytics can look at your background, at your tenure, at your history, and with others, and come up and provide HR with, hey, this might not be the best candidate to get to that level and invest in that. Maybe there's someone else that has a higher propensity based off of what we've already seen in our organization. So, it's providing that flashlight in the dark for HRs, because you're right. In the past, it'd be like, yeah, well, let's get everyone to here, and then only half make it. Well, suppose that you knew the better half that has a higher chance of getting it, and you focus on that. Imagine how much savings you've just made.
Yep. And also maybe unlock some potential.
Absolutely.
Or a lot of potential. So here's the thing I love about ChatGPT, for example, is that it's captured the intelligence information of the world. It's the amount of data it's collecting is staggering, and that's why it's so expensive. And that's why at the general sort of ChatGPT, chatbot, large language model end of town, the investment required is in the hundreds of millions. In fact, it's going into the billions. So making sense of all that data is really what's, because humans generally have been good for pattern recognition, going, there's something going on here, there's a trend emerging, what is it? Okay, so, but AI is actually can be a great assistant to us as humans to identify trends, what's moving, what's changing. So are you using AI to try and identify trends within an organization as well, not just trying to predict from current data that what future may look like? Is that what you're also doing with AI? It's actually trying to get a handle on, there's a lot of data here, but what's really going on? What are the trends in the organization? Are we going backwards, forwards, sideways? So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So a lot of great classification models out there that we look into to help identify and categorize individuals and their work efforts and say their career path even. And we're looking at, the great thing about these models is it can support just a tremendous amount of data in order to help classify people, say, in certain areas that will provide HR a further insight into their workforce. So yes, we're looking at classification models, AI prediction models, which are fantastic. And take, for example, those prediction models. Not only are we predicting an outcome that with high confidence, but we started that and we've taken that another step where we provide what's called explainable AI. So after we come up with a prediction, as you know, an AI predictive model, it's going to look at all the features that go into that model. And when it comes up with a given prediction, it may utilize some of those features, higher others than say another prediction. If you and I went through an AI model, it may predict us both as, say, a high risk to leave the organization. But the information and the features that used in your model may be different, may be weighted differently than the ones used in mine, because the AI is able to learn across those elements as what's going to make the strongest prediction. So, and it makes a great prediction. But what we found is clients were then asking, well, here are two people, it predicted somewhat the same, but why? Why did it, predict the outcome the same of these two people? What did it use? So we use what's called explainable AI to take that prediction back through the model and see how it impacted how each factor impacted the prediction. And that gives a lot of intelligence, a lot of insights to people as well. It might be, based off of my age or my tenure gave me a higher flight risk, as opposed to maybe, in your case, it was, some other, lack of training or your supervisor had a history of people leaving underneath them. So again, all these can be pumped into the model, but the AI model is going to be able to know what features and factors to weigh heavily, and thus when after the prediction's made, it can feed it back as intelligent insights on why a prediction was made. So two elements that are really important Not just getting the prediction, but understanding why a prediction is made.
Okay. That's interesting. So I interviewed a guest a while back, and we were talking about, he talked about the fact that he seemed to have a lot of his staff leaving shortly after he hired them, 6 months up to 12. And a good friend of his, I think it was like a performance coach or, entrepreneur coach, CEO coach, came in and watched him for a while, and he said, you're micromanaging your staff. In other words, you hired them to do job A, and you're telling them how to do it. And they're going, what point? Why am I here then? You're telling me what to do, right? So this observation by a human resulted in him being aware of what he was doing, which then led him to adjust his behavior, which then led him to find out that now he has people working for him 6-7 years later because he actually now trusts them. He also then lets them do their job. His job is to help them with tools and so on, and then get out of the way.
Yeah.
How does AON data, how do you collect that data to identify something like that? Because those discussions, that micromanaging is done off piste. It's actually not done in front of a computer generally. So how would you identify that? I'd be curious.
Well, that's fantastic. So when we look to generate, say, a model, take your scenario a little bit further. The prediction that we're going to try to model out is, say, flight, person's propensity to leave the organization, and we've got all this historical data. And the features that we might drive into the model might include person's tenure, of course, some key demographics, maybe their number of promotions, demotions, their pay, how their pay has been impacted over the year. And of course, we take into account, supervisors and supervisors' history. How long has a supervisor been a supervisor? How many people have they supervised over that time period? So all those elements would go into the model. And again, you and I could get the same potential for a high flight risk, but maybe you worked for a supervisor that was a micromanager, and the system would be able to go through the history and find those correlations, find those things that, what are the commonalities between the people that left? Oh, the supervisor seems to have a high turnover rate of its subordinates. So, whereas maybe it got to my record, I had a totally different supervisor, but maybe, my career was ending and it knew that I was going to retire soon, so I was a risk of leaving. So, those models, we've used the similar models in retail organizations. And, retail, you've got people turning over left and right that work at the stores. You've got during seasonality, people coming and going. But then again, you've got back office people, you've got people in transportation and the supply chain that stay pretty long careers. So we were able to take the data. In the past, you'd have to create multiple models and train multiple models. But now with AI, you can take one model and it's going to learn. It's going to learn things about, oh, this person's working in a store, so it's going to go through a different path to kind of come up with that prediction versus maybe someone that's in the supply chain that's usually more career oriented. So believe me, it's absolutely amazing to see these models at work. They know. If you feed good data into it, they'll know how to work with it.
Yeah. Excuse me. So with ZeroedIn, what it sounds like you're trying to do is this holistic model. So it sounds big. In other words, you are measuring a lot of different silos within an organization.
Yes.
Including employee monitoring, which is a rather interesting area. And I've had discussions with a couple of friends recently who run businesses and have been in businesses. So ZeroedIn, when it started, did it do it like, we're going to concentrate on one area or one level of statistics across the organization? In other words, did you go for a minimal viable product solution off the bat? I don't know whether you know the history, but the issue is that you sound like you're doing this, but maybe you started here to actually get the product tested in the marketplace. Do people really want this? Because a lot of people develop software and people go, I got to know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P. And what they really want was just B, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did ZeroedIn start? Because I'm curious about that in terms of an entrepreneurial startup in a data knowledge interest age.
Yeah. So, we started, and I would say that the main premise is still a major factor in why we started. We saw a clear lack of insight around a workforce because systems and transactional systems supporting the workforce was very siloed. So again, these systems were data rich but information poor. And that's where we don't transaction, we don't have someone keying in data. We pull data from multiple different systems. And I think that's still a key element. I think HR organizations of all sizes are still very siloed, and there's still that need to bring in and get good information about their workforce so better decisions can be made. So that was one of the core tenets of our application, and do it in such a way that we weren't dictating to an organization, oh, you got to get your data in this format and then give it to us. Now, we didn't want to be that. We didn't want to, have one size fit all. So, when we built our application, made everything highly configurable. So we can go into an organization and say, look, don't worry about cleaning all your data and putting it in this format and sending it to us. We go in and say, well, you probably have a ton of data already, kind of either it's being communicated to other systems or it's historical data. Let's start with that. Let's get the ball rolling. Let's peel back those layers of your onion. Send it over to us. Let's see if we can't start working with that. And then based off of the configurability of our system, we can say, okay, this is this type of information. This is this type of information. We can start bringing it together and quickly being able to show people in the HR space what their data looks like across those different silos in one dashboard, in one report, in one environment. So it normalizes a lot of that.
So it sounds to me like you're going an organization, you're going, okay, you've got Salesforce, you've got HubSpot, different CRMs, you've got an ERP that's, A, and then someone else has got an ERP that's B. And you would have to plug into each one of those with an API, application programming interface, is the term for that, I believe. So you are basically going, okay, you don't need to clean it. We'll actually plug into all your systems, accounting, whatever, and we'll then we provide the intelligence and the data collection to help you make sense of all that information across all those vertical platforms.
Right, exactly. And what we're going to say is like, okay, we have some templates. We've been working this, we have some good places to start, whether it's, good measurements for finding headcount and turnover and movements, but they're templates. They're places to start. And every organization is slightly different. So we found that the key is really to be able to say yes, but in such a way that it satisfies the client's uniqueness and certainly can be reproduced. So that was a key driver in our application development.
Right. So the other thing I'm curious about, there's been some big trends that have been driven by the pandemic. Number one is remote work. Okay, so everyone was sent home so they didn't die. Okay, so and there's now a lot of discussion going, well, that was a good idea. Should we have just let COVID run its course and herd immunity emerge? On the other hand, what's happened is a slow movement of work from home became a revolution where now it's very acceptable even for banks and big companies. Some are going, we're just remote. Atlassian, I think, big Australian company in the software space for collaboration software and so on. It's basically, we don't care. We want you to work from wherever you like, and you can be in Spain and you can do something for the USA, whatever. So we've got that big movement. So how have you adapted to what we've now become? It's not just remote work now, because you've got like a whole landscape from companies that are totally remote work to those that are going, you've got to come back to the office. You got to commute to the tall office tower, you've got to be in a cubicle every day, and we're going to feed you, bread at lunchtime. So there's the old school, right, which is that. There was the cool offices, which is another thing too, right? Then we have now the hybrid and the totally remote. So how have you adapted to that? Have you had to actually add and develop your software to help with that in terms of that type of management?
Yeah, we've helped organizations understand the types of work that can be best performed remotely versus
Yep.
work that might be in-house. And I think where you see organizations, see some organizations take the stand, we want everyone back to work, and then the others saying, whatever you decide. But I think the answer is really in the middle. The answer, and it's not just, if you feel like it, come back and not. I think the answer is, let's analyze, the types of work, the productivity, the cost structure, and let's find out, where it's going to be best that we come back and where it might be best that we stay remote. And I think a lot of organizations that are kind of gotten caught up in the political aspect of let's all get back or let's all stay out. And I don't think it should be a political decision. I think it's a prime example for analytics to help organizations make those decisions.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, because it's not a fad. It's actually staying with us.
Yeah.
And it seems like the truth lies somewhere in the middle and variations of that, which is the hybrid model. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
if you go into the city of Sydney, where I live, Thursday has become night after work to have drinks. It has become the new Friday. And because people work from home Mondays and Fridays, and the bosses are going, well, I think they're just taking a couple of, they're taking long weekends. They're really gone snow skiing, really. So, but that leads me to the next question, which is employment monitoring and management at the desk with software, just like Time Doctor, for example, I believe does this. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. For me, I see it as an invasion of privacy. Others see it as, my God, I can make sure that Jimmy's working 7.9 hours a day out of the 8. And if he doesn't or she doesn't, Jimmy or Jane, I'm going to kick their ass because they're not working hard enough for me. So it's very much an industrial model applied to the knowledge workers, that, essentially people went to the industry, the factory, and they're watched by the overseers from the top balconies looking down on the underlings. What do you think of monitoring software? And you can be honest, hopefully, about this.
Well, I think it's definitely out there. And I think there are even software apps that can, trick it. Like for my daughter's fairly new in the workforce, and they're monitoring, how often her mouse is moving. And there are apps that can trick it. But I don't have a problem with collecting that information. As long as it's done in a way that provides better insights and information. For example, an organization might be doing that and they find out that, productivity is actually increasing or decreasing. Hey, we have the same number of people online, but productivity is decreasing. Why is that? Why is that? And it gives them a better tool to look into to help try to answer that. Or, maybe by monitoring productivity does increase. It gets back to, what if it's solving a business problem, and it's not just being done because, someone wants everyone back in the office and we're just going to decide to do this, and it's going to be, now it needs to be correlated back to some business driver to say, hey, is it impacting performance? Is it impacting productivity? Then let's, use that data to support those problems and those questions.
Yeah. Because there's different types of work. So, and if we go into, like, I've used a couple of examples. Number one is sales. Okay, so I did sales in the tech industry. I was worked in one of the first PC dealerships, IBM PC dealerships in Australia, and we sold computers to corporations and businesses, right, and government. And sales is easy to measure in a way like how many phone calls did you make today? How many doors did you knock on today? How many leads did you generate? Then how many leads did you convert to sales did you generate? What's the size of that? So these are very data driven, very specific. So in a sales role, I'm glad I didn't have that software back then, because I got good sales, but my metrics might have been shit on the other level. So this is where, okay, Jeff was only got 5 leads, but those leads, are $1 million client, right? So anyway, so this is where the data gets interesting, isn't it? So, or on the other hand, if you're more a little bit management, you need to be strategic. You need to be saying, okay, how can we make this product? You might need, as Charlie Munger has talked about Warren Buffett, he might just sit on his ass and just do a lot of reading. So there's not going to be a lot of mouse moving, is there? And that sort of.
Right. Well, it'd be an interesting correlation too, is if you're tracking that data for both the at-home workers and the workers in say the office, what's the difference of time? Is it, I would argue you'd find data that shows people working from home more hours than those that are commuting.
Yeah.
And what is that? How does that impact productivity? So yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yeah. And on the other hand, what's interesting too is that in the office, there's a lot of distractions, especially young people, right?
Mhm.
They're in their 20s. They like hanging around with water cooler, like having drinks after work, and they sort of pop over each other's desk, and one male might be slightly interested in another female, and so they're not going to be very efficient.
Right.
Maybe.
We've all been there.
You're right. That's a whole another discussion about workforce
Absolutely.
management and what you should and shouldn't do in the office, and things we used to do in the 80s and 90s are a little different to what's allowed today. So, yeah.
It reminds me that here in the States, there was a country singer, Toby Keith, and he had this song, Drinks After Work. And it was all about the work environment, and they're all waiting to go out to the happy hour after work. And I was like, yeah, those were great days.
Yeah. I look, you've got to watch your P's and Q's so much now. So dating, modern world, with a lot of, I suppose,
That would
politically
be an
correct
interesting
attitudes.
study.
So what?
That would be an interesting study, studying, people that found their spouses at work, you know. Um, hmm,
Yeah, yeah.
think about that one.
Well, to think about it, you spend more time with them than you spend with, someone at a pub, and it's there's a PhD somewhere in there. In fact, there's
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
more about
Absolutely.
maybe about 20 or 30 PhDs, which are
Yeah.
great, but sometimes they can be called pile higher and deeper and don't learn much, but that's fine.
I
Um,
wonder if the people that find their spouses in the same work environment have higher productivity or lower
there's something for you to do a global data search, anonymous, of course, that tells you,
productivity.
okay, maybe you need to have another piece of data mapped into your system that goes, are they having a relationship? How many got married? How many were having affairs? And were they more
Right. That's
productive?
true.
Yeah.
What does that do to the work environment? And what does it do to the other people around the work environment? Mhm.
Yeah. Does everyone become really happy because there's a lot of sex going on or something? I
Yeah,
don't know.
don't
But,
know.
or are they just, blissfully just walking around the office in a romantic daze? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot we could study, Jeff.
Anyway, yeah, but it's a time doctor type software. For me is actually I do like the fact that you can actually get software to fool the other software.
Yeah.
So look, if I was working for someone, seriously, I would need to get that software because I'd fire myself. I think if you looked at my productivity on a purely data, you're like, we live in an information world, so you need to collate information to make get good data to help you make better decisions. What does that look like? So anyway, and Warren
Yeah, it's
Buffett,
not easy.
Warren Buffett had obviously did okay out of sitting on his ass reading. So, but anyway.
Yeah, he did okay. Still doing okay. Did he just get remarried? I think he did.
No. That's Rupert Murdoch. He can't help
Oh,
it.
that's okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. That is another Aussie.
Just another billionaire, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So my partner and I were just looking at that guy. He's married for the fifth time. He's 96 or 94. And look at his wife. She's 67. Quite, big age gap. Um, I wonder if she's on employment monitoring as well.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. So we've been distracted, which is actually fun.
Yes.
So look, so ZeroedIn, you guys have this holistic approach where you try and collect data across the different vertical applications within an organization to make sense of the workforce. How long has ZeroedIn been running for now since starting?
About 20 years, believe it or not. So, this idea has been around. We've seen it. Like I said, we started in the HR space as one of the transactional based systems and supporting developing a learning management system. And we saw back then that these transaction systems have tremendous rich data, but it's even more valuable when you can correlate it to the other areas about the human resources. And we started 20 years ago, and it's been a great time. Difficult, challenging at times, but and now with the advent of large language models and AI, we think we're just starting another climb up, and so it's exciting.
Yeah. So your target market must be more like large enterprise. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say we like the mid market as well. We typically over 1,000. If you're under 1,000 employees, most likely the people in your HR knows everybody else, right? But as soon as you get over that 1,000, it's more than a couple of people can know everybody. They need to rely on the data to help make better decisions about the workforce.
Right.
And we've worked with organizations that have 100,000 and north. But I think the sweet spot is 10 to 20 to 30,000 is a good organization that's really needs a tool without having to spend a lot of money that can bring this data together in a way that supports their business, supports the uniqueness, and that's what we try to do.
Right. So is this sort of like a starting point? You run it as a SaaS model, don't you? Software as a service.
Yes.
So
Yes, we do, but we're also very unique. We have some clients and partners in which we can deploy the whole platform behind their firewall. So that's unique. I don't know of anyone else that's doing that. Most of it's software as a service model where it's in their cloud environment, but we have that, and that's great, and it is wonderful. But we also have some unique clients and partners where we deploy behind their firewall. We work with partners in which we are their analytics engine. So it gives them a stronger model to go out to their client base and say, not only are we providing this service to you, but from a reporting, we can augment that by bringing in additional data, not just what we do, but then we can augment it with more information and provide a more robust reporting and analytic solution. So
okay,
both work great.
cool. What you talk about then is about putting that data behind a firewall and operating, and then you analyzing that behind their firewall as opposed to how you having it on yours. Or
Right.
that raised a very interesting question, which I had a discussion with last week, in that it comes down to copyright. It comes down to hanging on to your IP as an organization. And the World Wide Web, social media has made everything a lot more transparent. The big language models are going out and scraping the web, collating the intelligence of the planet, putting it in their data centers. In fact, what they're doing is they're actually scraping your IP. If all your information about your organization, your culture, how it makes you successful, will turn up in the results. In other words, your competitors could learn about you by tapping into that data collected by the large language models, which are staggering inside. They're talking trillions of data points and beyond. So what do you think about the fact of trying, because you must get some incredible data about what makes a business successful. what makes this business successful. As in, they don't micromanage, they hang on to staff longer, they do internal training and so on. That data could be fascinating, and if it anonymized would be even more fascinating. So do you guys, in discussions, because of I suppose, the broad collection of data across the web that identify the IP of an organization, in fact, it's being used now to collect data about organizations by asking and interrogating ChatGPT 4.0. Do you have this discussion with your clients about trying to look to protect their IP? In other words, creating what we call a walled garden of AI?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just as important as their data itself. In some respects, it's basically the same. It's it's intelligence gained from insights into their data, and it's their data, and it has to be in a secure environment, and we take that very, very seriously. We work with government agencies that are also here in the States that are highly secure. So yeah, that's important. And we treat that as insights similar to their personal identifiable data, that they house, and that's their data, even the insights. I think from an IP perspective, what we bring to the table is the support to generate those models that provide those insights. So that's where if we're coding an AI model, if we're coding something that's going to be used in getting that insight, the insight is a client's, but our IP is that the code that we bring together to either bring the data together to generate a model. That's what we've considered our IP, but the insights that it produces are the data's, and it is just as secure and valuable as their own personal data.
Right. That's good, and that's cool. And I expected that question. That answer, sorry, that's good.
The other aspect about these too is here in the States, they're doing a lot of there's some legal implications too about any analytics or insights. Well, there has to, especially on people. So if it's analytics around people, you have to have audits on bias. So is your model and the outcome, is it producing any biases to any ethnicities or genders, or so you have to do the audits into that as well. So that's another key aspect of workforce analytics that we take seriously as well.
In talking about this data on the IP and collecting culture, gender, and so on, and everything, you must have some incredible data anonymized that you could use to create incredible reports and give insights into the state of HR, the importance of culture, the importance of diversity, the importance of, not micromanaging, for example, just pulling things up. But have you guys generated like an annual report on insights on the HR industry, the direction and trends of HR and employment in the USA, for example? Have you done any of that? Because that would be fascinating.
It would be fascinating. And there's a lot of organizations to do that. Deloitte is a common, Gartner does that. Our role is really to work with an individual organization so that they have that insight for themselves. And let's face it, each organization believes that they're very unique, and in most cases they are. Do they like to be able to trend themselves against benchmark data? Absolutely. And we can bring in that benchmark data, whether it's the Department of Labor or other publicly available data elements. We can certainly bring that in and do some benchmarking. But I think what's valuable is, an organization head of HR might read a Deloitte or Gartner industry analysis report, right? Doesn't mean that's what's happening in their organization. They like to know what's happening in the industry, or at the industry as a whole, or outside, whether it's a geographical region, but it doesn't mean that's what's happening inside their organization. And I would argue what's happening in your organization is more important because it's going to drive their organization's productivity, their profitability, their the value, their stock values. So that's where we like to try to focus our energy.
Yeah. Okay. The other area that that interests me is the rise of almost what we call a new species of company. That is what you call your, I suppose, mega multinational organization that's been enabled to rise because of the World Wide Web, the internet, the transfer of information. So we now have, I think, $7 trillion companies. It was unimaginable a decade ago.
Larger than most countries.
Yeah, so I'd actually did a little report recently just to try and get some concept around this, is that of those $7 trillion companies, they actually are larger than some of the countries in the top 20 GDPs. So these have incredible power and influence, and they operate without national rules. They work within the rules of the organization, but this is a new species of company. We had them before, okay, big oil companies, big pharma, but there wasn't anything of this scale. Do you guys work with any of those, or is that because the data on those, that would be fascinating in terms of what makes them successful? I'm trying to dive in, written books about it. So how do you manage 1.3 million people globally?
You break it down. Yeah. I mean, it's that simple. How do you eat a elephant, right? You break it into pieces one bite at a time, right? So, and the great thing about, what we do and the analytics around it is it can support such large volumes of data and generate insights very quickly from it. But it still has to make sense. And, even those large multinational organizations, their Latin America business is quite different than the European business. But they can certainly use some of the same metrics and some of the same algorithms to help support each area.
Yeah.
But no, it's a great question, and it'll be interesting. I guarantee that all those organizations get to that size by looking at everything, by getting as much value as they can out of every data nugget. They don't just happen to grow that size. They're doing things purposefully, and analytics, and especially analytics around probably their most valuable assets, their people, is quite valuable to them.
Yeah. Well, you only have to look at the likes of Microsoft, who's in that gang of 7. And then you have to look at Amazon again in that group.
Alphabet.
Then guess what they operate? They operate huge data centers, which actually they sell data access and management. And on top of that, then the rise of AI has then put a whole supercharger under data collection and management. And that's why we're seeing the rise in the video that the processors allow them to actually process that data. So it's a fascinating time, and you must be almost salivating every morning when you get up because you've got so much more to play with.
There's not a day that goes by I don't wake up and saying, how can we tweak some data to get some value to one of our clients? And whether it's large or small, I some of what our clients do is really interesting. We have clients that still make, they're manufacturing. One that comes to mind, it makes forklifts, and it's just to me a fascinating industry. I think, well, what can we do to help them gain more value about the data that we're working in? And there's a lot out there. There's so much things to do that can be done.
Because that'd even percolate into product development. Like, how do you build a better forklift because you've identified within the organization there's issues because the data told you.
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
So Keith, just one more question. I might think another one, but one more question is, what have you learned along the way? You're obviously a data geek. You've got a Gamma watch like me, and that makes you fantastic. Amongst many other things. But what have you learned along the way by applying data to the HR industry? What are the couple of big insights and learnings that you've discovered that and been aha moments or whatever, and you could share with our audience.
Well, yeah, I think the large language models and the generative AI has an really interesting future to what we do in around workforce analytics, and it's still emerging. It's happening quite quickly, and we're on top of that. We really find that to be fascinating. But in general, when it gets down to what's going to add the most value or making better decisions about the workforce around workforce analytics, I would say there's no magic bullet. There's no magic wand that you can wave to say, oh, I've got all the pieces of information I need. It just doesn't exist. However, just like we talked about before, one bite at a time, you can start getting into the detail. You can start cleaning data. You can start looking at the data your organization has. You can start thinking about, hey, if I could predict X, this would gain a certain value. Not because it's cool, not because it's, you've heard someone else do it. Think about how that prediction could actually be used. Those are the kind of things I like to get the job done. I like to be things, simple solutions for complex problems often are the way to go. And
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what I would focus on.
Okay, cool.
I certainly hope your listeners found this information valuable, and I'd always love to carry on the conversation.
Exactly. Well, I really don't care about them. I've learned a lot, so I'm good. I do care, but it's right. Hopefully what I do is, for me, is if I find something curious, hopefully someone else would be curious about it as well. So for me, I followed my curiosity until it became compelling, and that's how I actually run my life. If you want to distill how I run my life, and ever since the age of 50, I discovered that, and I've been doing that ever since. And life's an adventure as you watch and learn, try and make sense of all the information that runs past your plate, across your screen. So one last question for you, Keith.
Mhm.
What brings you deep joy and you would do it for free if you're able to do it every day?
If a client says, man, that's valuable, that's something I didn't know, I would look. I answered that question very quickly because I know if I do something where my client's finding the value from it, that excites me. That's what drives me. Knowing that they're gaining something, insight, something valuable, and I love that feeling.
So what brings you joy is bringing value to the world.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Great answer.
So
But
easy.
at the end of the day, happiness is actually making a difference with others and communicating with others, isn't having those great relationships with others. And Aristotle talked about this about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, but Harvard research has revealed that beyond $75,000 a year, happiness really comes from our relationships with other humans, friends and family. So, and by you adding value to those, you are just doing what Aristotle said we should do and what Harvard is telling us should do. So
easy.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy. Yeah, that's just choose happiness.
That's right. That's right. Jeff, thank you so much.
It's
Yeah,
been
and
class, mate.
if any of us want to carry on the conversation, I can be reached on my LinkedIn account, which is Keith A. Goode, or they can reach our website, ZeroedIn.com. Always love to carry on the conversation.
Great. Well, everyone knows how to contact you now. We'll put it in the show notes. And thank you very much, Keith. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure this morning, despite it being 7 o'clock. But look, I'm getting a bit older, so I really don't want to rush things around. There's things called priorities, so it's good. And podcasts, I get so much joy out of having these conversations. It's a blast, and I learn so much by just having them. Because we're all trying to make sense of the world, and each podcast helps to make a little bit more sense of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.